Hello and welcome to Chai Chat with Lavina, where we bring difficult and interesting people as well as issues. And one such event I went to recently at that of Democracy Forum, where such a difficult issue was being discussed, and I thought this has to be brought to the Chai Chat platform as well. And today we are discussing the issue of, is the West committed enough to address the root as well as root out terrorism? And this is being hosted by Democracy Forum, which has been founded 5 years back by like-minded people to address issues like... So the question, do we know what are the causes of terrorism in this country? Andrew?
Well, I think you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head. There is no lack of commitment. Rooting out international terrorism is the main security and foreign policy issue, and recognised as such in every Western capital. But there is no clear notion about how to do it. There is no consensus about how to deal with Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. There is no consensus about how to deal with Islamic radicalisation in Muslim communities in Britain's own inner cities. So the desire to do it is there. There are very strong moves. There's a lot of money being spent. But I don't think there's a clear diagnosis, nor is there a clear direction of travel.
I think the West is only committed when it affects them. After all, Osama bin Laden was there, and the women in Afghanistan suffered because of that terrorism. And people in Afghanistan suffered, and nobody did anything about it till they were not attacked in the West. So I think that they are committed when it affects them. And one of the root causes is that when you stir up terrorism, especially in the name of religion, you take the demon out of the bottle, it's not going to go back and it's going to hit you too. And I think that that is what the West has to understand.
What do you have to say about that?
I would say you've got who supports and suckers and fuels these proxies. They're often a proxy force. So Pakistan supported the Taliban for years. They harbored bin Laden for years. And I think now we're seeing in the Middle East, the old ogres, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, are actually fueling it by helping one side. I'm working in North Africa, Libya. There's all sorts of people who are involved and supporting different groups. And Libya is becoming the sort of Afghanistan of the 90s. So you're fueling more. So I think that sort of stirring up is a geopolitical gameplay, which is very, very damaging. And I felt always covering Afghanistan and Pakistan for nearly 12 years, the West never tackled the root cause, which was the argument between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Said, what do you think? Would you agree with us when you're saying that they intervene only when they want to? And should there be an intervention at all?
No, I completely agree, because commitment comes from clarity. If you don't have actually clarity about the sources, and I don't think there is still actually clear understanding what are the sources of terrorism. What we are witnessing today is firefighting. I was listening to Prime Minister Cameron's speech. I agree with some of the things, but still, one question, yes, actually, nobody can justify act of terrorism because certain policy was taken. But one should also see where the West had gone wrong. For example, like the rise of Daesh. All those countries where the state had collapsed, the state institutions were destroyed, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Libya. These are three countries which are where the Daesh has made inroads. And now we are witnessing the emergence of Daesh or IS in Afghanistan.
Clarity and confusion. So there is no clarity and there is a lot of confusion.
I would think, I would think that there are sharp dilemmas of two kinds. I agree in part with what Zaid Hussain says, but it's not just a military question. I mean, clearly there's been a major dilemma for Western countries to intervene or not intervene. I think the West has a perfectly legitimate reason to address its problems in that way when they reach your borders. Now, whether you do this through an educational or propaganda program, or whether you can do it by some other means, I think there is still no concern.
Well, it is quite a tricky one. Intervene or not to intervene? If you intervene, then your questions, which we have been constantly, but we are fair enough when it reaches our border then to address it. Tom, please come in as well, and then Andrew, please, yes. Can I just
Well, if I might just wonder if we're using the word intervene euphemistically. I saw over the past few years quite obvious, overt efforts to effect regime changes, particularly in Iraq and Libya, and going on currently in Syria. I mean, this whole business of jihadism began with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And who promoted them? The United States of America and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Root causes of the conflict begin in Afghanistan because up to that time, the Muslim world was quiescent. There was...
Because, sorry to butt in, but I think there are 2 points there that's slightly wrong. I see the Islamism, the violent Islamism, coming out of Egypt, out of the crackdown, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood, which then got outlawed, and Zawahiri, who really drove it, it came out of the prisons of Egypt. So that's where the ideology came from. So I don't think supporting a war or a resistance to an occupier necessarily means you're going to have terrorism. And I think also looking at Libya now, which is where I'm covering the war. But it wasn't.
But look, there is the Afghan Mujahideen. The Afghan Mujahideen were fighting for their country. But what were the Arabs doing there? What were the Pakistanis doing there? What were the Uzbeks doing there?
Sure.
They were getting a taste of power and money. And I think, excuse my saying so, there are 2 or 3 things when there is no clarity. You say, don't do this. You know, as a child you're taught, okay, if there's no clarity, then you take out the negatives. Even when a doctor starts to look at a patient and say, let's remove this out. And I think firstly, what we have to look at now is that we have to realize that all the Muslim countries where you had these tin pot dictators for 22 years and people were not allowed to speak, people were not allowed to protest, the only politics that took place was in the mosques because they couldn't close the mosques. And therefore you empowered Islamists.
Yeah, you made that war become
And then
religious.
you became...
But that's the problem
but
with
then you also...
Pakistan as well.
But then you also beat them up. No, Pakistan is different. Pakistan, there's no been tin pot dictator for 22 years. There has been political parties there. There's been a civil society there. Pakistan is not Egypt. Pakistan is not Libya. And the second thing I warn, that now we have come to a point where intelligence agencies of the world are making policy. Now when they and policing makes policy, their policy is not sensitive to race or religion. And that is why you have young people in Britain, in France, rebelling because they feel humiliated when they are going about their work and want to latch on.
But we're talking about 2 different things here. If you look at international interventions, which Western countries in particular have practiced, where you've got post-conflict situations or failed states, they have broadly been disastrous. Iraq is the primary example. I think you could say the same of Afghanistan. You could also say the same of Libya. And that is why, quite remarkably, a year or 2 back, the British House of Commons voted, to the government's great surprise, against aerial operations against the Assad government in Syria, even though there was clear evidence that Assad was using chemical weapons against his own people.
I think when we talk about resistance, yes, resistance is justified. It's legal. But when you use religion for a proxy war, and there the trouble starts. And that was the problem. Finally, for a majority of Afghan, it was a war of resistance against the Soviet occupation maybe. But what was the use to fight that battle? And that was most important. I mean, like...
the intervention
the
is
jihad. No, I'm saying the use of Islamic jihad was
making it
was
a jihad
actually
rather
to
than
mobilize support and fighters and to bring in fighters from all over the Muslim world. And that is the rise of militant Islam, I would say. Militant Islam started, I'm not saying started, maybe actually there are some instances in the past too, but really actually has got strength from the Afghan jihad. When your national or citizen goes to fight in any country, maybe actually his country of origin, then actually you can't stop the other to fight from the other side. That's what I'm saying, the proxy war.
Can I ask each one of you, what do you think is the root cause of terrorism in the world today? One, everyone.
It's not just the money where it's come from, but I can't really say the one point that this is the root cause, but definitely lack of governance, lack of democracy is something, and discrimination is something that will give rise to any kind of militancy and terrorism. And then you spike it with religion, then it is out of your control. Tom?
Well, I revert to the belief that the origin of the crisis was the anti-Soviet drive controlled by Saudi Arabia, who exported money and a Wahhabi ideology into an internationalized, as Karat has just said, they were coming from all over the Middle East. They were being recruited from all over the Islamic world to go to Afghanistan to fight this noble jihad, and that was that germinated the whole concept of Muslim jihad against the West. At first it was against the Soviets, but it quickly turned to be against the West.
It varies from nation, country to country. We cannot say that there is one source of radicalism. For example, when we are talking about Britain, there may be actually different reasons and sources of militancy. When we are talking about Pakistan, we are talking about Middle East. They're all varied reasons. There may be one or two common points. But overall, it also depends on the certain situation. We have to see this in a context of each country.
I would say dictatorship and oppression. I mean, I think in Egypt, in Libya, in all of the Arab countries, and I would say the Soviet Union. I would blame the Soviet Union for invading Afghanistan. That was the most horrendous war of the time. 5 million refugees, a third of the population. It was the biggest. It was bigger than Syria is today. And so that's what inspired so many of these young Arabs who came to help.
I wouldn't say that I wouldn't pick any one cause of terrorism. What I would say is something that it is clearly not. It is not a clash of civilizations, as has sometimes been defined. The causes and the consequences of terrorism have as much affected the Islamic world as they have the Western world. Huge rise in sectarian conflict in Pakistan. There's been you can blame the West for a lot of things, but I don't think you can blame the West for that. I mean, there's an international aspect, the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's not a clash of civilizations. The techniques of terrorism, suicide bombing was invented by the Tamil Tiger in the modern world, not by any Muslim. And these things move across societies. They affect, inspire, or corrupt generations and peoples in different ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. But two very quick questions we will take in the next segment, which is, can we get a handle on this at all? But also, I think, which you raised very interestingly, why the radical Islam has somehow taken over the moderates, and can within the Islam something can be done or should be done at all. Thank you very much for joining us on this first segment. Please do stay with these two questions and we'll come back on the same discussion again. Thank you.